Morning ESS people. So this is your official warning that next week is test week. That's right. Gonna get a test in before Christmas. That means that you will be tested on all of the ecology stuff covered so far. Now obviously that's a fair amount of material, and with all the disruptions and me being away this week, that's tricky. So I'm gonna make this little video now for you guys as a bit of a refresher and a reminder of everything you need to cover that could pop up on this test for you. Okay, so the first part of this topic is species and populations. So there's a lot in this section that you guys need to be able to talk about and define. The first thing is just to be able to define both of those things, a species and a population. So remember, a species is simply a group of organisms that are able to reproduce and produce fertile offspring that can keep on reproducing without any issues. Population is the number of an individual species that are present in one particular place at one particular time. Those last two bits are important. A habitat is just a place where an organism lives, and a niche is its place in the habitat, its place in the ecosystem. How it interacts with all of the biotic and abiotic parts of its environment. Remember, those abiotic factors include things like humidity, light, temperature, mineral availability, and so on and so forth. Whereas the abiotic interactions include things like parasitism, migration, predation, and various other things. A big example of a biotic interaction is competition. And competition, if you remember, splits into both interspecific competition, that's between different species, and intraspecific competition within the same species. And intraspecific competition is the most intense because they're looking for the same stuff. So remember, if a population grows in its environment in a pretty standard way, it will follow an S curve, which means a lag phase, an exponential growth phase, and then some sort of balance and equilibrium reached in the end. If it follows a J curve, that means that the organism's population has increased beyond the carrying capacity of the ecosystem and could crash. Carrying capacity being that limit, the upper limit of where the environment can support that number of organisms. Have a look at what density-dependent and density-independent factors are in terms of how they affect population size. I'll give you an example of density-dependent. Density-dependent factors are basically where the amount of living things in a given area, or the build-up of that number, actually affects the amount that can survive. So competition, for example, is density dependent. As more organisms are born and the population grows, there are more organisms there fighting for resources. That has an effect on the future population of that species. So it's density dependent. There's lots of factors that are density dependent, that depend on the amount of organisms there. There are some density independent factors. Light availability, for example, is density independent. But make sure you've got a few examples. Okay, you need to be able to define community and ecosystem. Community being all the different living things that are there, all the different species, all the individuals of every different population. Ecosystems, remember, are all of the biotic and abiotic components of a defined area, of a particular place. You have to be able to talk about systems in ecosystems, right? So flows, stores, and so on. Carbon, nitrogen, energy. Make sure you've had a look through those things and that you're happy and you understand how nutrients and energy are cycled around ecosystems. On that note, you've got to know about your different levels of ecosystems. Primary producers, primary consumers, secondary, tertiary, perhaps quaternary, apex predators, decomposers that recycle everything in the ecosystem, nutrient-wise, not energy-wise. Got to be able to draw a food web, a food chain, two different things, and pyramids of biomass. And finally, you've got to remember what the three laws of thermodynamics are and how they apply to ecosystems. Next, we've got zonation and biomes. So you need to know what the different biomes are. There are 8 that you must be able to define in total. Hopefully you've all researched plenty of biomes now and done your biome comparisons, so you understand some of the differences between those biomes and why they exist. You guys need to know what the Tri-Cellular model of biomes is. Remember, this is our convection currents that exist in units of 3, below and above the equator, that create those different environmental conditions that lead to all these different biomes existing. You need to know what zonation is and why it happens in any particular ecosystem. You should have at least a few examples written down somewhere of where zonation may happen. And you've got to be able to talk about examples of succession, which of course you just did this week with your big old poster board that I'll look at when I get back. You've got to be able to compare your R and K strategies for living things and relate those to different levels of succession. At what points do you tend to find R strategists, and at what points do you tend to find K strategists along those different points of succession? Make sure you know what can lead to a variation or a move away from a climax community. What can disrupt succession and lead to alternative climax communities? And of course you need to know how to sample an ecosystem, so different sampling methods that we've talked about, plus exactly how to use quadrats, why we need random sampling, and how we can analyze the data with some statistical tests. So that's it. That's all the stuff so far that you need to be able to cover that I may put in the test next week. Have a look through this video, check off the things one by one. I haven't gone into much detail on any of these things. You need to, it's just a prompt, right, to get you guys to think. So you now need to delve in, get into Cognity, get into your notes, have a look online, find as much as you can on all these different things. Use the textbooks that are in the classroom, right? There's plenty of them in there that you can grab and steal for a few days. Get yourselves prepped for next week because this test, you know, it's important. I'm far too ill to be talking any longer, so I'm gonna leave it there. Enjoy.